Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav and we are continuing to learn the halachos of the Daled Minim. We're holding in Siman Tafresh Mem Tes. We pick up today, we're going to be learning Daf Kuf Chaf Amid Aleph. We pick up on the bottom of Kuf Yud Tes Amid Beis in Siman Tafresh Mem Tes Sif Aleph. So here in Sif Aleph we have been discussing the problem of the Daled Minim that are Guzzle or Ganuv. Daled Minim that have been stolen. And we mentioned in a previous year that there are basically two issues with stolen Daled Minim. One issue is that it's not lochem. The Torah Dirshu tells us, "L'kachtem lochem pri tzadar kapis tamarim anafetz avos arvei nachal." So the Daled Minim have to be lochem. For certain, on the first day of Yom Tov, when the mitzvah of Daled Minim is in the mitzvah say da'araisa, you have to be able to fulfill the requirement of lochem. So you need Daled Minim that belong to you. We mentioned that there's another potential problem, which is the problem of mitzvah haba ba'avera. If you're going to make use of a stolen one of the Daled Minim, and if at the time that you take the Daled Minim to be yotze the mitzvah, you're also in fact stealing them, so at the same time that you're trying to be mekayim a mitzvah, you're actually being over an avera, that would be a problem of mitzvah haba ba'avera. We quoted the medrash that says that if somebody tries to be yotze the mitzvah of Daled Minim with something that's guzzle or ganov, then the lulav, the esrog, it goes up to Shamayim and it proclaims in Shamayim, look, this person is trying to generate a schus by picking me up, and instead of generating a schus, he's generating the opposite because he's busy stealing me. So that's the problem of Daled Minim that are ganov or guzzle. Now we pick up on the bottom of Kuf Yud Tes Amid Beis with the words of the Ramah. Says the Ramah Haga, Umishum Zeh. Since we have this problem of Daled Minim that are Ganav or Guzzle, and since we see that you cannot be Mekayim the mitzvah with Daled Minim that are Ganav or Guzzle, therefore, says the Ramah, Yesh Li Zaher. We should take care. Shalo Yiktzaitz HaYisrael Ba'atzmai Echad Me'arba Minim Shebelulav L'tzarech Lulavai. We have to take care, says the Ramah, that a Yid should not harvest, he should not cut any of the Daled Minim by himself for use with the lulav as part of the Arba Minim. So the Ramah is telling us, don't go, if you know somebody who has an Esrog Pardes, let's say there's a non-Jew who has an Esrog Pardes, and you want to go cut an esrog for yourself, you tell the non-Jew, I'll go out into the orchard, I'll look through the trees, I'll find an esrog that I like. No, you should not cut the esrog yourself. You should not cut the lulav yourself. You should not cut the hadassim or the haravas yourself. Why, says the Ramah? Because the problem is the karka ain't an exelis. We know we have a rule that karka, land, real estate, ain't an exelis, is not stolen. As the Mishnah Berurah is going to say, real estate is always becheskas bailam harishainim kaimi. Real estate is not like metaltalin. It's not like a computer that you go to somebody's house, you take it, now you've removed it from his rishus, now you stole it, and now it's yours. Real estate is not stealable. It's always in the same place. It's mechubal karka. It's part of the land. It's not something that you could steal. You could lock out the other person. You could hold on to possession. You could take possession of it. But it's ain't an exelis. Exactly where it is, that's where it always was. And it's always becheskas bailam arishonim. Everybody looks at that land and they say they know that that land really belongs to the other party. So there's a rule that karka ain't an exelis. Ustam kutim goes like karkahem. And the Ramah says that at least back in those times, stam kutim, a general as a general rule, the non-Jews were known as being goes like karka. They would take over land that belonged to other people. And therefore, v'yavai b'gzeila liyadai. And therefore, when this Yid goes into the orchard and he cuts an esrog or he cuts a lulav for himself, he's getting it through gzeila. It's going to have the status of a stolen lulav or a stolen esrog, etc. Now let's take a look right away at the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah will explain the problem over here a little bit with some greater clarity. So let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Tes. Shalo Yiktzaitz. The Ramah said that the Yid should not cut the Daled Minim for himself. Be'er ha'inyan. The explanation of this topic is, you should not cut any of the Daled Minim from land that belongs to the non-Jew by yourself. And this is true, he brings this down from the Magen Avram, even if the non-Jew gave you permission. So you went to somebody who had an esrog orchard, and you asked Tony, who is the owner of the esrog orchard, if you could go cut yourself an esrog, and he said, sure, go ahead, cut what you want. No, you should not go cut the esrog for yourself. Why? Explains the Chavetz Chaim. Deshema gozala karka mi Yisrael. Maybe Tony really stole this land from a Yid. Now we're going to see later, even though the Mishnah Berurah says over here that the problem is based on maybe Tony stole the land from a Yid, it really doesn't matter if Tony stole the land from a Yid or Tony stole the land from another non-Jew. Doesn't matter. There's no point to that. The problem is, Deshema gazal akarka. Maybe the land is actually stolen land. Destam akum goizle karkahem. Because at least at those times, stam akum, as a general rule, the non-Jews that were suspected of stealing land. The kaimalon de karka ain't an exelis. And we know that we have a rule that karka is not stealable. Hainu, that means, says the Chavetz Chaim, she'ena kenuya legazlin b'shum yiyush. Land that's stolen never becomes the property of the one who stole it, even if the original owners were miyayish, they despaired of getting it back. It doesn't matter. The one who steals it does not get ownership of the stolen land. Because land is always seen as remaining in the possession of the original owner. Uperos hamuchubarim lakarka, and peros, fruits like an esrog, or it doesn't mean specifically fruits. It means anything that grows from the ground, like hadasim, aravas, aluluv, uperos hamuchubarim lakarka, produce of any type that is still attached to the ground, harehu kekarka, that has the same status as land. And the same way karka eina nigzelas, anything that's mechubar lekarka is also eina nigzelas. So now let's analyze what happens over here. Tony stole this land. Tony is using this land illicitly. He stole it from Yankel, or maybe he stole it from John. Doesn't matter who he stole it from. But he has he's holding this property illicitly. It's not his. So the karka, now karka ain't an exelis. So the karka is not yet a stolen item, so to speak. Now, there are aravas growing on it. Tony goes ahead and tells Yankel, sure, you want to cut aravas? Go ahead, cut aravas. Yankel goes ahead and cuts aravas. When he cuts the aravas off of the ground, guess what? Now they're stolen aravas. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ava mishenitlash haperi, when the produce is cut off from the ground, heavy gezel. That's when it becomes stolen. Vahatol shoi hu goizloi. The one who actually cuts it is the one who's stealing it. As long as it was mechubar lekarka, karka ain't an exelis. Now you go ahead and you cut it, now you're stealing it. Lefikach, therefore, that's why the Ramah says, Lo yiktoitz ha-Yisrael ba'atzmoi, the Yid should not cut the hadasim, the aravas, the lulav, or the esrog off the ground by himself, deyihiyahu ha-goizel, because if he goes ahead and he harvests it, if he actually is the one who cuts it, he's the gazlan. Ella rather, yiktitzenu ha'akum, let the non-Jews go ahead and cut it. So now, Tony goes ahead, he cuts the aravas off the ground. Now that the aravas are separated from the ground, it's not karka anymore. Now it's a stolen arava. But now what happens? Now it's a stolen arava. Now we can analyze the ownership of this arava. As long as it was mechubar lekarka, it was seen as belonging to the original proper owner of the land. Now that it's cut off, now Tony just stole it. Okay, now we could analyze the ownership of this arava. Tony stole it. The real owner of the land, he was miyayish. Tony, or whoever it was, threw him off of his land. He hasn't had access to his land in years. He was miyayish. He was already miyayish on the land. And he was miyayish on everything attached to the land. Now that Tony goes ahead and cuts the arava off the land, that's the act of theft. There already was Yush. The original owner was already Miyayish. Now Tony goes ahead and sells it to Yankel, or even if he gives it to Yankel as a matana, that's a shina rishus. That's a change of ownership, right? He's transferring it to Yankel. Yush and shina rishus, that affects the Kenyan. So now Yankel is going to be kind of the arava. If Yankel cuts the arava off the ground by himself, he stole it. Now you can't say, well, what's the problem? He stole it. Now it's at his rishus. The owner was biyayish. That's Yush and shina rishus. Yankel is kind of. That's not true, because the shina, the Yush has to come before the shina rishus. In the case if Tony cuts it, so when Tony cuts it, now the Yush is chal. The fact that the original owner was biyayish wasn't negeya until the arava was cut. Because as long as the arava wasn't cut, it was kaka. Kaka ain't exelis. We don't care about Yush. Yush isn't the factor. Yush doesn't become a factor until it's detached from the ground. So if Tony detaches it from the ground, he detaches it from the ground. Now the Yush is chal. Now we have Yush. Now Tony sells it to Yankel, shina rishus. You have shina rishus, you have Yush, shina rishus, Yankel is kained. But if Yankel cuts it from the ground, you're trying to make the shina rishus and the Yush at the same time, or the shina rishus and then the Yush. That doesn't work. That because it's, and the reason it doesn't work is because bi'isura baliyade. Yankel got it bi'isura. He was the one who did the act of theft. By cutting it from the ground, he is the one who stole it. Now we don't say Yush and shina rishus, Yankel is kained. Bi'isura baliyade, we don't say that. But if Tony cuts it from the ground, he did the act of theft. Now there's Yush. Now Tony goes ahead and sells it to Yankel. Yankel is kained with Yush and shina rishus, and he can use it to be yaitz of the mitzvah. And the Mishnah Berurah explains this. Rather, the non-Jew should be the one to cut it from the ground. Now the Yush of the original owner is chal, al davar anitlash, on this item, this arava that's detached from the ground. V'hu yimsar liyad Yisrael, and he gives it over to a yid. V'kana Yisrael loisam al yidei Yush shebiyada akum, and now the yid will be kained by the Yush that took place while Tony had it. Tony cut it, the Yush was chal, v'shina rishus shebiyadan, and now the shina rishus that takes place when Tony sells it or gives it b'matana to Yankel. Now the truth is, we had this same exact halacha back in Hilchas Sukkah when we were talking about schach. We said that by schach, the yid should not cut the schach by himself. This was in Siman Tuf Reish Lamed Zayin Siv Gimel, and it's very interesting because the daf is the same exact setup as it is over here. Here we have the Ramah saying this halacha. The Ramah begins on the bottom line of Kuf Yud Tes Amid Beis, near the end of the line, and it runs to Kuf Chaf Amid Aleph. Back in Siman Tuf Reish Lamed Zayin, we have the Ramah on the bottom of Kuf Amid Beis. V'chein lo yiktitzu Yisrael aschach ba'atzmam. It runs from the end of Kuf Amid Beis up into the top of Kuf Aleph Amid Aleph. The same exact halacha in the context of schach. And over there, the Mishnah Berurah sends us over here for the beer, for the explanation of the issue. Okay, Mishnah Berurah is cutting yud. The Ramah said that the stam kutim are goizlei karka. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting yud v'chol zeh lechatchila. This whole issue is only an issue lechatchila. Aval b'di'evet, post facto, if you went over to a guy's property, he gave you permission to go cut a ravas or a lulav or an esrik, b'di'evet kosher. Imhu b'rishus akum, if you had permission from the non-Jew to go ahead and do this. If you didn't have permission from the non-Jew, you can't walk into his property and steal his property. Umevarach alayhu, and b'di'evet, you can even make a bracha on this arava or a lulav or whatever, whichever one of the Daled Minim. Because let's remember, the whole problem over here is based on a chashash. It's based on a chashash that stam kuta goes like karka. But we don't know for sure that the karka is stolen. Land that was conquered during a war, that does affect a transfer of ownership. Kedisa begitten daf lamed ches. Ois cutting yod aleph. The Ramosh said Yiktsitzenu Akum, the non-Jew should cut the Daled Minim from the land, not the Yid himself. Yisrael. The truth is, the non-Jew doesn't have to cut it. A Yid could cut it. So, for example, Tony has the land, and Heshi needs aravas. Now he knows the Ramos says that he should not go into Tony's land and cut the arava himself. And so he goes over to Yankel and he says, Yankel, do me a favor. You go over to Tony's land, ask Tony if you could cut some aravas. You cut the aravas, and then you sell them to me, or give them to me b'matana. That would work. The reason that would work is because you're solving the problem in the same way. Over here, what's happening is Yankel goes, he cuts the arava. Once he cuts the arava, the yish of the Baalim Rishonim take place. Now Yankel sells it or gives it b'matana to Heshi. He makes a shidi rishos. Heshi is kainet, and everything is fine. So that's why the Mishnah Berurah says here in Yud Aleph, "V'huadim k'shekaitzis Yisrael." It doesn't have to dafke be Tony or another non-Jew that cuts it. It's the same halacha would apply if another Yid cuts it for Daisa l'chaveroi and gives it to his friend. Shari, that's mutter, Kevin to have a lacha yish, because the yish will be chal when he cuts it, and then the shidi rishus will happen when he transfers it to the next Yid. V'yikneh mehem, so the Ramah said the non-Jew should cut it, and you should buy it from him. V'hu adin, says the Chavetz Chaim, kishanachri yitin loy b'matana. You don't have to necessarily buy it from the non-Jew. The non-Jew could give it to you b'matana as well. Shari, that's fine. To have a layish v'shidi rishus. Again, you have a yish v'shidi rishus, you're okay. V'yuchal gan ke levarech l'kulei alma, and you would even be able to make a bracha on these Daled Minim. V'afte kasavdu le'el, even though we said in the previous year in Sifkat Vav in the Mishnah Berurah, das hataz v'hagra, dal yidei yish v'shidi rishus asa levarech. We saw that when you have stolen property, if you have stolen Daled Minim, even if there's yish v'shidi rishus, you still should not make a bracha since you got it through gezel. So there's still an inyan of boitzei berech nietz Hashem. Hainu dafka begezel vaday. Chavetz Chaim says, let's keep this in perspective. Over here, we're talking about chashash. We're not talking about gezel vaday. Over there, in Vav, we were talking about gezel vaday. Aval hachet chashasha ba'almahu. Over here, where we're only dealing with a chash, the shema gazal ha'akab karka. There's a possibility that the non-Jew stole the land. If there's a mamish, a halachadik kinyan of yish and shidi rishus, we're not going to be makpid. Okay. Continues the Ramah 3 lines down in the middle of the line. Ve'ein chilik bazeh bein Eretz Yisrael ay chutz la'aretz. In the context of this halacha, there's no difference between Eretz Yisrael and chutz la'aretz. Why should we think that there's a difference? Explains the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Kat Yud Gimel, ay chutz la'aretz, ritzayna loymar. What the Ramah wants to say over here is, Afa pi sheshama karkois ruban shal akum heim me'olam. Even though in chutz la'aretz, we don't really have a chash that the original owner of the land was a Yid. Mistama, in Chutz La'aretz, the original owner of the land was a non-Jew. If you come to the United States of America and you want to go marching back through the generations, even if you're going to worry that the land was stolen, who was the original owner of the land? Maybe some Indian. Or it was Hefker. I don't know what it was. But the chances that it was owned by a Yid are infinitesimally small. So even though in Chutz La'aretz it's Ruben Shal Akum Be'olam, Vim Gizoloi Me Akum Gizoloi, and therefore, if you're worried about Stam Kutim steal land, so this land must have been stolen ultimately from a guy. Afilu Hachi Aser, says the Chavetz still Aser, the Gezel Akum Gamken Aser. What do I care if it was originally stolen from a guy? The bottom line is stealing from a non-Jew is also theft. So it doesn't help in any way. Now, there's a Bir Halacha over here that's very important to us. Many of you might be wondering, well, what if I have an arava bush in my backyard? Like I do. This year, my arava crop was a beautiful crop. All of my hashanas for my entire family, I think I pulled 18 sets of hashanas out of my arava bushes. All of my hashanas came from my backyard. Many of my aravas came from my backyard. So, wait a second. Is that a problem? I went ahead and I cut them myself. Now, I bought my house, I bought my land from a non-Jew. If we're saying Stam Kutim guys like Karkahem, So maybe the land that I purchased really was stolen, and karka ein an exelis. So the land really still is becheskas baila b'rishayim. The land that my house is on still belongs to the baila b'rishayim. And now when I cut the aravas, I detached them from the ground. It became a stolen arava when I cut it, and now I'm trying to be yotze the mitzvah of Daled Minim with stolen aravas. Maybe I should have had a friend of mine come, cut it, and then give it to me b'matana. That way I know I have Yush Shiri Rishos. So let's take a look at the Biur Halacha here. Dibra Maschil Be'atzmoi. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Lefizeh, based on what we just learned, Lo Yokoitz HaYisrael Be'atzmoi, a Yid should not cut one of the Daled Minim for himself, Afilu Misadeh Shal Atzmoi, even from his own land, Kishenik Nesadezu Meyakum, if he bought it from a non-Jew. So, like me, I bought my land from a non-Jew. Maybe I can't cut it myself. Rather, I should get a nachri to cut it, and I should get it from him. Or, like we said, maybe even another yid. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, Kfar Hevi HaBirkei Yosef, the Birkei Yosef already brought down B'Shem Sefer HaTruma V'Asmag V'Aradvaz Debizmanenu Lo Yamrina Nachrim Goizle Arahem. Nowadays, we don't say this rule that Stam Kutam are Goizle Karka. V'chein He'ela Gam HaTaz B'Siman Tafrei Samach Daled Ayin Sham, and the Taz says that as well. V'lachein, and therefore, Etzleinu, by us, She'ein Muchzakem HaNachrim Ligzal Karkois B'Yisrael, where the non-Jews do not have a chazaka, that they steal land from Yidden. V'gam kol ha'karkois muchzakim lebaleim al pi dina de malchusa, and the dina de malchusa, the judicial system nowadays recognizes that everybody who's sitting on a piece of land is the true owner of the land. You have a title, there was a title search, you have a deed, you are recognized under dina de malchusa as being the proper owner of the land, and the one who you bought it from. When you went and you bought your house, a title search was done, and a title company went ahead and guaranteed title. So the legal assumption is that the land belonged to the one who you bought it from, and you bought it from him in the proper manner. Chavetz Chaim says you do have to remember that the Berurah Yaakov wrote that in his days. Avo bizmanenu, but the Chavetz Chaim says in his times, lefi masha motzei hapara'os, there was looting and stuff going on. Yesh lehisbainin ma'od bazeh. You have to look into this carefully. V'talu lefi hamakom, and it depends on the place and the time that you live in. I would tend to say that, like I said, nowadays in our areas here in the United States, you don't have this problem. Everything like I said, when you buy a house, there's a title search done, a deed changes hands, it's certified by the legal system, and you are the deed owner. You are the presumed owner of the land. It's interesting because also, if you go back, who did the land originally belong to? Most of this land was empty. If they want to say it belonged to Indians, if it belonged to Indians, the United States came and they conquered it. And the Gemara Gittin says kibush Melchama is a kibush. It does affect a change of ownership. So I don't think we have anything to worry about. Okay. Let's finish off this sif. Says the Ramah on the bottom line. Lulav she'agadoi kuti va'asa'oi. A lulav that was bound together by a non-Jew. So a non-Jew took the lulav, the hadassim, and the aravas that he tied together and assembled your lulav for you. Kosher, it's kosher, kabay sukas kuti. The same way a sukkah that was built by a non-Jew is a kosher sukkah. You could have a non-Jew build your sukkah. You're not mechuyev to build your sukkah, and it's a kosher sukkah. Says the Ramah, same is true by the lulav. If the non-Jew puts your lulav together for you, it's a kosher lulav. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting your dalet. Sha'agadoi akum, that was bound together by a non-Jew. It's what the Ramah wants to say is, even though lechatchila, you see, really a lulav doesn't have to be bound together at all. Really, it doesn't have to be tied together. You don't even have to pick them all up at the same time. You could pick up the lulav, make a bracha on it, and then put it down. Pick up the hadassim, put them down. Pick up the aravas, put them down. Pick up the esrog, put it down. So the whole requirement of binding the lulav is not really a requirement, but the Mishnah Berurah says, even though lechatchila there is a mitzvah to do it because of Hiddur mitzvah. We do recognize that the act of binding the lulav hadassim and the aravas together is an inyan of Hiddur mitzvah. And even though it's an inyan of Hiddur mitzvah, if a non-Jew does it, it's fine. Nevertheless, kosher al yedei akum. It's still kosher if a non-Jew does it. However, the Chavetz Chaim does say, take a look at the Magid Avram, it's his opinion, that lechatchila lo ye'egdenu, that lechatchila non-Jew should not do this. And the reason is, because we have a rule, the kol she'ena mechuyev badavar, ena rashoy l'saknoi. Anybody who's not obligated in something really has no business working on it and being masakin it. Umitam zeh, and for this reason, interesting, halacha that not a lot of people realize. Umitam zeh, says the Chavetz Chaim, gam isha loy te'egoy lulav lechatchila. Lechatchila, your wife should not assemble your lulav for you because she's not mechuyev b'davar. Yes, the women like to take the lulav and esrik, and they could make, we paskim, in at least Ashkenazim, paskim, that women could make a bracha on the Daled Minim and the Yotza mitzvah if they take the Daled Minim, but they're not mechuyev b'davar. It's a mitzvah asay shazma grama. They're not mechuyev, and since they're not mechuyev, they should not be the ones doing the Hiddur mitzvah. A male who's mechuyev b'davar, he is the one that should be doing this Hiddur mitzvah. Vayin sham b'bir halacha sheberardu d'bedina ein chash b'davar min adin. It's not a problem. When we come makam tav lizar bazeh, but it is better to be concerned with this, and a man should do it himself, not his wife. V'dafka, however, this only applies be'eged hatachtoin, on the bottom bindings of the lulav, where you bind the lulav hadassim and aravas together. Shesham oiged kalaminim beyachad, that's where you're tying them together. Desham ikar mitzvahs eged, because that's where you really have the mitzvah to tie the Daled Minim together. That's where it's significant. But the rings that you put on the lulav on top, bazeh and kpeda, that's a much lighter form of Hiddur mitzvah. That's not putting the minim together. That's just beautifying the lulav. Over there, the Mishnah Berurah says there's no kpeda at all, and even an isha can do that. Okay, we're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time with Sif Beis. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The mitzvah of limud HaTorah should be made and against Klal Yisrael. The Baruch should send Yeshua's refuahs and parnassah shidduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the BS Gal Tzedek b'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.